Okay. Our instructor for Veg Club is Carol Appenzeller. Carol thinks about growing food more than probably anyone should, and that is to our benefit. She's been growing great veggies for over 3 decades. At least half of that's been on Bainbridge Island. She's going to have the equivalent of 33 4 by 8 foot beds on her shy quarter-acre, which is an inspiration to every vegetable grower west of the Cascades. Please welcome Carol Appenzeller.
Thank you, John. Hello, everybody. I'm glad you're here. I always say that because I really am. And tonight we're going to talk about insects, and it's almost always that we talk about pests when we talk about gardens, but we're not going to talk about pests until next month when more of them show up. And right now, tonight, we're going to talk about how to attract ahead of time and preserve the insects that can help us, because there are so many insects that can help us. And if you, during the talk, have any ways that you accommodate them or attract wildlife to your garden, or bring insects or snakes or toads or anything in to help you in your garden, and also just to be part of that ecosystem, please do say so. You can put it in the chat if you want to. You can, if I take a breath, good luck with that, wedge it in with a shoehorn and just call out and tell us something if you like. So one of the things we're going to learn tonight is to differentiate some of the beneficial predators and parasitoids. I'll explain what that is later. But of course, I'm going to invite you to look around the margin of this picture that I'm showing right now and try to figure out who's the beneficial and who is the predator on your plants, who will eat your plants and who helps you in your garden. So you can do that for a second. And of course, the answer is that all of these are helpful insects, and there isn't really much of a predator in any of them. I mean, much of a harm in any of them. So before we start looking at sort of a gallery of who's who, followed by how we can make our gardens worthy of them, I would like to preach for a minute about something called biophobia. So biophobia is a disdain for living organisms and ecosystems. And biophilia is appreciation and prioritizing those. So these are our concepts here. And it says phobia in biophobia, but it often isn't experienced as fear. It can be, but it's disgust, disrespect, in lack of appreciation. So people will say, ew, that gross pond. And it's just a little pond ecosystem, but they'll see that there's green on the surface and they'll say, ooh, that's gross. So it's not necessarily really fearful. And it comes up with insects a lot, like our reactions to insects. So I bet I'm preaching to the choir here, but I'm going to suggest that biophobia about insects is so common that almost everybody feels it a little bit. And it's not really considered a phobia to have someone say, oh, I can't stand them, I got to leave. But it is useful to examine it in ourselves and help other people we know. It can be other adults. It can definitely be kids. I work with little kids who are sometimes extremely biophobic of insects anyway. And the way that it happens is we're seeing increasing disconnection from the natural world. So people are spending more time in built environments. And I'm saying this on Bainbridge, where everybody's in the woods all the time and you're gardeners. So it certainly isn't everybody, but kids are getting less connection. So for example, when I was a kid, I knew that if I sat on the ground, I knew what I was going to sit on and which insects might be there and stuff like that. And it didn't really bother me. I wasn't afraid when I saw ants going by. And apparently, research shows that we're getting less and less of that comfort. And certainly people are responding to it. They're sending their little ones to forest preschool and things like that, which is great. But it starts with disconnection. And then we hear feedback from grown-ups saying, come on, sweetie, we don't have time for that. When the kid is looking at a bug, we got to get into the store because we're all busy. Can you kill that spider for me? Why? Don't touch that, it'll sting you. This sort of predictive, it's going to hurt you. Don't touch that, it's dirty, put that down, that'll make you sick, that kind of thing. So there are other ways to talk about it, and that are less likely to create biophobia, especially about, insects or fungus and things like that. And we hear from researchers that the more disconnection people feel, the more it affects their physical health, their children's attitudes, their likelihood to go into nature. They can get a sort of zero bug policy where they're just going to exterminate everything. And also that we make social and political choices not to preserve nature. So you're certainly welcome to make all your social and political choices yourself. But if you're interested in making, more political and social choices that help the environment, it's nice to help promote biophilia. So I agree, some things that bugs do are gross, but it's mostly gross because they're different from us. Like, we're not as grossed out by the fact that lions eat gazelles as we are that bugs pierce the exoskeleton of their prey and suck their guts out. That's gross, but we eat meat too. So what we can do instead is we can try to abandon our long-held assumptions. So we can, or we can help other people do that. We can do it by choosing understanding, especially if you go, ugh, right? Or somebody goes, that's not worth looking at, or come on, we gotta get going. So we can stop and we can say, I'm curious about that. And we can change what we say from don't touch that, it'll sting you, to, if you grab it, can you imagine if you were tiny and you got grabbed, you might defend yourself. And they have a special defense called a stinger. That's why we don't grab it, but we definitely look at it and we put it in jars and we feed it, or whatever it is that we want to do. So we can definitely change our language. We can take 25 seconds to look at bugs and animals and fungus and things like that on the way into the store. Although I know people are super, super busy, so I empathize. You can also go to the Bug and Reptile Museum in Bremerton. They're super enthusiastic. It's a passion project. It's totally free. It's super kid friendly, and everything's in a really tight box. So if you do have that and you want that fear and you want to take your kids there, or your grandkids or your nephews, you can say, well, I feel a little fearful, but let's go and we can be brave together. And it's really cool and fun. And also be patient, but don't procrastinate. So I have a 5-year-old who is definitely a 5-year-old friend who is definitely biophobic, but I don't push her toward anything, but I say, hold on, I see a bunch of spiders outside. I'm going to go look at them. And she screams, no, I can't go. And I'm saying, I'm not talking about you. I'm going because I think it's cool. And then she watches me through the window, and pretty soon she's by my side watching them and saying, I'm trying not to be afraid. So that is the looking for all those opportunities and not putting off those opportunities, but also being patient with her behavior. So that's my little story about that. And if you have other ways that you choose biophilia over biophobia, I would love to know about it. Gardening is one of them, I think. Does anybody have one that comes to mind or has come to mind when I was telling my story there? Just want to make sure we have time. Okay, if it comes to mind, let me know. So let's look at some of the critters that can help us in the garden. I'm not talking about pollinators. I've already said this several times today. So I'm not talking about pollinators this time because there's a lot of information on pollinators, and almost everything you do for the things I'm talking about, which are predators and parasitoids, as I said, will also help the pollinators. And John's going to tell us a little bit about his pollinators as well. So here are ladybugs. So on the left, that's what their eggs look like. You'll often see those eggs on plants that have aphids or whiteflies or some other little pest, because the adult ladybugs look for food supplies for their kids. So this is aphids, or what they want to eat. Now, these are the babies. I think this is so interesting because they look nothing like what I would expect a baby ladybug to look like. And if I saw a whole bunch of them on my plants, I would say, they must be eating my plant, because otherwise, why would there be a herd of them? Well, that's because they just hatched. And so they are going to go out and eat voraciously, and they're going to turn into these on the right-hand side, and then into that little red thing before they turn into a ladybug. And if you know that you're looking for these, you can be going into, get new tires or walking around a parking lot or something, and you'll see these. So if you are someone who wants to keep their eyes open, you can see them on different plants. Can you go to the store and buy a cottage cheese carton full of them? Yes, you can. But this is where they get them from. These are overwintering ladybugs. I can tell you where this is. It's in California, East Bay. And there are like trillions of them, I don't know, billions at least, in this canyon in many places. And they go with the cartons and they scoop them up. But the thing is, these are overwintering and they don't stay here. It would be deadly for them to stay here once the weather warms up. So what they are supposed to do is have an instinct once the weather warms up to fly really far. So if they put them in cottage cheese carton and you put them in your garden, the weather warms up and they fly away really far. So that is why they say they don't stay in your garden. What you can do instead is make sure your garden is a place where ladybugs who are flying from elsewhere, if they come in, then they'll want to stay there. So that's what we'll do at the end. Lacewings are our second candidate for helpful critters. So there are green ones and brown ones. They're different species. This is what their babies look like, and it's eating an aphid. They are so voracious that if the eggs were laid at ground level or leaf level, the first one out would eat the other eggs. So this is an adaptation that the lacewings have developed to keep their eggs up out of the way of their voracious brothers. And when they're pupating, they look like this or like that. So sometimes I'll see it under my savoyed spinach leaves or my chard leaves or something. I'll see something like this. Does anybody have anything to say about ladybugs or lacewings? Okay, let us know. Let me know. Okay, I see a fly. I, like most people, think, ew, gross. Flies are gonna, get dirty stuff on my food. But not all of them. This is a tachnid fly. There are many, many species of tachnid flies. So they don't all look exactly like this, but do you see the bristles on his bum? That's a tachnid fly characteristic. And the adult tachnids eat pollen and nectar. But the babies are laid, the eggs are laid on often the larvae, like this corn earworm or whatever it is. The tachnid fly laid the eggs on it, and then the babies slowly eat this creature and eventually kill it. So this is like a parasite, but parasites don't kill their hosts, like fleas don't kill a dog, but a parasitoid puts its babies on, and the babies do continue to eat long enough to actually kill the host, which is how tachnid flies help you. And sometimes I see these in my soil. I'm not positive that they're tachnid fly. I mean, this one is a tachnid fly. I'm not positive the one that we see are tachnids, but that I see are tachnids, but I suspect that they are. Let's see. Okay, I just wanted to check the chat. Here's a trichogramma wasp. Do you see that thing that she's holding? That is an insect egg. This is a wasp. She's not interested in stinging you. She is 2 millimeters long. So a millimeter, in case you've forgotten, is you touch your fingers together and then you try to pull them apart without without them touching, but also just get them as close as you can. That's a millimeter, and she's 2 of those long. She's tapping the egg so that she can see how big it is, because then she knows how many of her eggs to lay inside of it, and then they eat it. So these are super hard to see, but sometimes I look at the dandelions in my lawn or the daisies, and they're in there, especially early in the season, because they need stuff to eat. This is the opposite. 2 or 3 years ago, we had a whole bunch of these in August and September. They're really big. They're like that long, and they're gorgeous. And they love like herb flowers and stuff. A great golden digger wasp. They do dig holes in the ground, but they don't let nest. They don't have thousands of wasps in one colony, and they're not defending a colony. So they are not very aggressive, and they just want to go about their business. But they take larvae and paralyze them and bring them down into their little nest, and they give a larva to each of their babies. And then the baby gets to eat it and mature. There are also true bugs. So many of them are helpful and eat predators as adults. Assassin bugs, damsel bugs both do, and you can see those in your garden. And this one is less common here. I think it's a tree variety, but no matter what, whether they're long or broad, they have a shield-shaped body. Can you kind of see that? Even these are very long, but it's still shield-shaped. And they're called bugs, like scientifically, they're called bugs. It's not a slang term. But a lot of times people will see these and they'll say, oh, that's the brown marmorated stink bug. I saw it in the newspaper. I definitely can recognize it. Or I grew up with stink bugs. They're no good. You should kill them all. But this bug, all 3 of these bugs are predators, and they eat the bugs. They eat your plants. So it's not always easy to tell. I'm going to skip that one for now. Oh yeah, this is, how can you tell whether it's a good one? That's the brown marmorated. It eats plants. This is the spined soldier. It eats things that eat your plant. So does this one. This one eats herbivorous insects. This one is a western red-shouldered. And that one, it eats plants, I think. Yeah. So here's another one. Icumon wasps. This inspires a bit of fear, because look at that stinger, but it's not a stinger. It is just an egg depositor. And this one looks like it would really hurt, right? Because it's really tough. But again, it's an egg depositor. It's called an ovipositor, and they do this. So these things, whoa, these critters want to eat your cabbages, but they're not going to get a chance because she is looking out for you, and she is eating from your ecosystem. These are called hoverflies. I think a lot of people have these in their garden. If it looks like a bee offhand, but it can kind of pause like a drone. So it goes, and then it hovers here, and then it moves a little bit, it hovers a little bit more. That, even if it looks like a bumblebee, like this one, it is a syrphid fly. People call them hoverflies or flower flies. A way to tell is that these will not be collecting any pollen on legs. Bees do, but wasps don't, and hoverflies don't. And hoverflies, all flies, have their eyes more frontal, so they look like they're wearing big goggles. Bees tend to have their eyes a little bit more to the side, so you can see they don't touch in the middle most of the time. And the babies of these I find quite often underneath a leaf. They're really squishy. They're soft little things. And I at first thought, well, it's green and it's hiding under a leaf, so probably it's trying to eat my plants. But then I learned that that's not what they're doing. They're eating the aphids that are under the plants and other pest insects that are under the plants. And this is what they look like when they pupate over here. So yeah, this is a fly, and that's a bee. So it's hard to tell the difference sometimes. These are minute pirate bugs. Not every black and white patterned insect in your garden is a minute pirate bug, but these are super tiny and they are voracious. They eat as adults, they eat pest insects in your garden. Oh, fun fact, there are about 1 billion species of insects on the planet. And you would think that like maybe half of them at least would eat our plants, wouldn't you? That they might be pest insects. But try to guess, get a number for what % of them are pest insects. John Fawcett, I'm going to make you make a number up. You got a number? What % you think are actually pests on crops?
14.
14%. Okay, thanks for being the victim, John, because it's 0.5% of them. So it's really not that many. I'm not saying your garden doesn't have pests, but it's not many of the entire species on the planet. These are also helpful insects. If you pull mulch away in your garden or ground cover or something, you might see these guys. These are violet, in this case, violet ground beetle. There are other kinds of ground beetles around here. This is a baby violet ground beetle. They're often in the soil and they will prey on slug eggs or little tiny slugs. Sometimes they'll eat a lot of things. Some of them eat detritus, decaying matter and things like that. This one is the one that I always see when I pull the cover off of my compost. There's always one scurrying away. And the reason it's scurrying off is it's a roving predator. It's a centipede. And it is looking for things to eat. Now, it eats with its jaws, so you don't want to grab it because it can bite you, but it's helping you at the same time. This is called a devil's coachman, I think, because it's a pitch black version of what a coachman used to look like. They used to wear short jackets with long tails in the back, like a cutaway coat. And it's also called a devil's coach horse, and it will eat slug eggs as well. Now, this is a mite. It's related to spiders. I know mites. They suck my plants and they make things look gross in about September, but not this mite. This mite eats the mites that suck on the plants. So just to show you that they're often friendlier than you'd expect. Look at all the bees we have. Now, these bees are not predatory, but I thought we'd take a look at the bees. So there are 4,000 native bee species. So we're all about saving the honeybees because they're so economically important, but our native bees are suffering as well. In fact, I saw a report recently that said 40% of all the insects, all the species of insects in the world are declining in population. So that means anything that we can do to help out is really important because they're so important to the ecosystem. And it's not like important to the pleasantness of the ecosystem, but to like the survival of how nutrients go around in the world. They're super important. John, you have some bees. Will you tell us about your bees?
Sure. We're in our second season of renting mason and leafcutter bees. We got spoiled last year because they actually dropped them off at our house and then picked them up. But the business has expanded, so you actually have to go pick them up near the south end of the island. It was super easy for us. The males don't have stingers, and you almost have to step on the females to get them to sting you. They are not aggressive at all. They're actually kind of docile. But you have to worry about, they are subject to predators. So they give you this little bee house about the size of a shoebox. You hang it on a post, in a sunny post in your yard. And then I think it's within 10 feet, you dig a little hole and put clay in there and put some moisture in it because they need clay to make their little cocoons.
For the mason bees.
For the mason bees, yep.
Yeah.
And then we also get leaf cutter bees, which come out in the when it warms up a little more. So end of June, early July, something like that. We've got our 70-degree days and plenty of them. They'll come out and they just get, well, busy as a bee.
Do you see the evidence of them that I show here in this picture?
I don't know as we see the evidence of them, but people who are smarter than me tell me that they work. So
Oh yeah,
we're-
yeah.
yeah.
I meant these little circles out of some of your plant leaves. Do you ever see that, or do they just cut leaves from
Oh
somewhere else
yeah,
that you
so
don't
I've seen
notice?
so I've seen this as well. Yeah, yeah,
I always think that this, I love when I see this because it's evidence that my garden has been worthy of leafcutter bees, you know? So there are a lot of things you need to do to make a garden worthy of dragonflies and toads and all that kind of thing. And so any score I can make, it's just like, thank you for leaving that little calling card. It doesn't really hurt your plants like productivity. It's often on roses, which is interesting to me.
yeah. It's every time we see something new or different in on our property, we just we always take it as an indicator of a healthy ecosystem.
That's really great. That's really nice. And they line, I understand, they line their houses with leaves for their babies, right? They don't dig holes though. Like people are little from the East are worried about carpenter bees, but we generally don't have carpenter bees that have big enough jaws to like chew holes through things out here. We usually have the little ones. And so that's not really much of a problem. These jaws are just for cutting leaves. And I don't know that this is our species because this is the most robust version of a leaf cutter bee, and I think he's very cute. That's neat. So is it too late to get them, John, if we want some? I think it's a bit late, right? We'd have to wait till next year to get leaf cutters or mason bees.
Yeah, so the masons, she's almost all out of masons, and then the leaf cutters, of course, she's still got some of those. And it's rentmasonbees.com, basically.
Rentmasonbees.com. How cool is
Yeah.
that? And they help pollinate your fruit trees specifically, or just is that what you got them for?
I'm told that they pollinate everything.
I'm sure they do, but people
Yeah.
get mason bees, for example, specifically because they want them out early, right? They want them out early when the
Yeah,
fruit trees are going.
right.
Well, thank you, John.
You're
I thought
welcome.
this picture was really cool because it's one of the really big bees and one of the really tiny bees. So they range in size dramatically. And we have these around here. They're so gorgeous. So if you haven't seen them before, you can keep an eye out for them. Like every time something lands on my arm, I'm now looking to see what it is. They are ground nesters. A lot of these animals are ground nesters, which means they need ground that has the right qualities. And I can talk about that in a minute. The females are iridescent and gorgeous all the way to their tail. And the boys have a two-tone outfit with striped pants on. It's just so cute. So I definitely look forward to seeing those. So those are not predators, but they are pollinators. So how do we make our gardens worthy of these insects? And it's an ongoing thing. You can always do more, but you don't have to feel bad if you just do a little bit. I think we can just always invite them. So one fact to know is that 70% of predatory insects nest in the ground. So when I see a bunch of insects coming out of the ground, I have an impulse to be very cautious because I think, are those yellow jackets? And I don't want yellow jackets nesting in the ground in my small yard. But there are other bees that I don't mind, or wasps, I should say, like the giant golden digger wasps, that I don't mind over in the corner of my garden, which is kind of dry and not really irrigated and semi-wild, right? I leave some conditions over there for them. So I'm not advocating that you keep absolutely every possibly stinging insect in your garden, but this is how they work. And I stole these from Matthew Shepard because his graphics are so good, but there's a link to his video, which is on the resource page. John, could you put into the chat that little chunk of stuff that I said about videos and resource page and all that that I sent you earlier? Thank you. So
yes, I will.
Yeah, thank you. So predatory wasp, this is a bee, but predatory wasps do it like this too. they have, sorry, a little hole in the ground. Sometimes they have a little like multi-room condo in the ground, but it's usually just one queen with maybe her daughters working on that. So it's a small thing, and they will, they'll nest next to other queens who do that. But it's not one big organized group. It's just that all the conditions are right there. So multiple queens and their daughters will nest, but it's not a 3 million bee hive. So they dig a little hole for each baby. And in the case of this bee, this is a ball of nectar and pollen. But in the case of the predatory wasps, they will parasite, they'll paralyze like a little cabbage worm that's trying to eat your cabbages. They'll come and paralyze that, and they'll put that in there as a packed lunch for the baby. And then they lay an egg, and then it grows and it eats whatever they left it. And then it will pupate, and it stays in the soil for so long. And it often takes a year. So this might be the summer, and this guy might take until the following year when it gets warm enough, because they're not going to hatch in the middle of the winter, because that would be dangerous, right? So it can take a year for them to come out. That's relevant to when we think about how to protect these guys, is that we need to leave the spaces where they're going to nest alone. And that's particularly relevant to the 30% of insects that are cavity nesters. So this is a cavity nester right here. This is like mason bees and leafcutter bees nest like this. And there's the larva eating. And there are wasps who are cavity nesters. So they would leave a paralyzed insect in there rather than a nectar ball. And that's the pupa, that's the baby bee or baby wasp, depending on who it is, waiting. So they get laid in here in one spring/summer into early fall, and they have to wait in here the entire winter. And then quite late, when it warms up, they're going to come out and they're going to start the process over again. Let's see, do we have any questions about that? I don't see it. If you see any, John, let me know, okay?
You bet.
Thank you. This is just, bumblebees. Bumblebees are not predators, they are pollinators. So I said I wasn't going to talk about them, but bumblebees love former mouse nests and little cavities. Sometimes if you have a lot of grasses and they kind of fall over, they'll make a cavity. Bumblebees like that. And so actually not cleaning up your stuff, if you're thinking, oh, I should have called people to help me clean up my stuff. Well, you've actually been virtuous and fantastic. So good for you. If you have areas that look like that, that's great, because they love it. There is always a place for somebody who's going to do us some good. This is a cavity nester. This is a raspberry cane, and this is pith that's been exposed. So I don't know if maybe this grower exposed the pith by running a knife down the side or something, but there are cavity nesters who can't chew through this. Like we have carpenter bees who can't chew through that, but they can chew through the pith. And they will make little nests in the pith. So a hollow plant or a pithy plant. So if you have pithy plants or hollow plants, sorry, then you can leave them for them to nest in. Let me let Dave in. Okay, but what we're told is leave last year's green canes all the way over winter and then cut them off completely late in the spring, so the babies will have a chance to come out. But that isn't quite how it works. So there's a better way to do it. The last year they were green, right? The queens don't lay eggs in the green canes. You have to leave dead canes. And you leave them from if you haven't cut off some perennial that you have that has either pithy canes or hollow canes, good for you. You're that far behind, excellent. Because you can cut them off, between 8 inches and 2 feet. And then this summer, the queens will lay eggs in them. And you think, well, that's going to, wreck my scene, wreck my look of my bed. But probably if they grew that big last year, it's not going to be long before these canes are invisible under the growth of this year, right? And so you can just keep leaving those dead canes on. Even next year, you can leave these same dead canes on and they will eventually decay. And you cut next year's canes to about this same height. And you just leave them on because it takes, they say, 2 years, because the first year it's green, the second year it's dead and it gets eggs laid in it. The third year, or that, yeah, I guess you could call it the third year, they come out. So it's like 2 springs after they've grown. So there is a link in the resources that looks like this, that explains all what's going on and how to help stem nesters. And you don't have to do it on everything, but you could try it on a couple of things, or the things, off in the corner or something of your garden. And I propose that you do just do it on everything. That'd be great. You can also use hollow tube things. You want to make sure they're really stable. So I hope that these are really jammed in there. It's also out of the rain. We don't want them to be wet, and we don't want them to blow away in the wind. And different sized tubes are useful. And if you can replenish those tubes once the bees come out of them, that can be good, because parasites can build up. So you either clean them or you discard them and put in new tubes. Okay, we hear a lot about these because they're super charming, but researchers are now suggesting that we not do this, because if you get parasites here that are going to destroy the babies, they can spread super easily. So it's better to have small groups of them in lots of different places out of the rain, rather than this admittedly gorgeous, but possibly less than ideal bug hotel. These are tunnel nesters or cavity nesters. They will nest in old beetle holes. So a lot of people leave up a tree. If they're going to fell a tree, they'll leave this big long tree. And I usually think, oh, that's for, because we like looking at woodpeckers, but it's also supporting a lot of what can be either pollinators or predatory insects. So you can leave your trees. Sometimes people will plant a dead tree. They'll just say, can I have that chunk of tree? And they'll just set it in their yard. So we're going to give them shelter by leaving your hollow stems. And rather than saying, you have to do it for this many years, you can just cut them off 8 to 2 feet, 8 inches to 2 feet, and leave them there. And they will disappear. Remember, they'll disappear underneath the new growth. Leave your dead wood and your leaf litter. Consider leaving some bare ground, because cavity nesters need bare ground, a lot of them. If you do mulch, then compost or leaves, something light, is better for those cavity nesters. Wood chips are heavy and hard to nest in. You can grow ground covering plants, and I'll talk about plants in a little while, but it gives a lot of cover for things like beetles and centipedes and things like that want to roam around and eat your pest insects. You can also give them clean water when it gets really, really dry, but they need a place where they can stand on an almost horizontal surface to drink. So you can put flat rocks in there. They don't want to get in the water. They want to be on a wet surface and drink from a teeny tiny bit of it. And also I have books in the resource page. So that's another thing that you can do. Oh, this is a picture of ground nesting bees. It's little tiny piles. It looks like little anthills. And a lot of the ground nesting insects that are not yellow jackets are not really interested in attacking us. I'm not saying they won't. Don't send your kids over to play because Carol said so, but check them out, see what you have, and yeah, consider leaving some bare ground in an out of the way place for ground nesters. You can also feed their parents. We need to feed their parents. So putting pesticides on your plants is really not good for supporting anything in your local ecosystem. You can plant flowers that are good for them. I'm about to show you like a whole bunch of flowers and tell you why they're good for those predatory plant bugs that have to grab your pest insects. You can plant a variety so that you get early blooms, mid blooms, and late blooms, especially early blooms. Because think about this, I want those predatory parents in my garden when the pests show up. I don't want to wait 4 months for the predatory insects to figure out that I've got pests in my garden. So how do I keep them there if I don't have any pests for them to eat? Well, before they'll eat your pests, they are prepared to eat pollen and nectar. So that's why we want to plant plants that provide pollen and nectar to them, because the adults will get protein from the pollen and carbs from the nectar. And then when they're ready to make eggs, they're going to be looking for really protein-rich sources. And that's when they go out and get the little worms that are eating your cabbages and things like that. So that's why we want early bloomers. You can mix a lot of different kinds of plants. Herbs have appropriate flowers for them. And you can have a bed that has herbs and ornamentals and natives, and even things that we consider weeds are really good for them, many of them. And of course, bare ground again. And I'm going to skip the rest because I talked about it already. So here's why we need particular flowers for these guys. This is not a predator. She does not have to have a mouth that can grab a larva or a worm that's eating your cabbages. She doesn't have to do that because that's not how she feeds her babies. So she can afford to have a mouth part that's basically a big long straw that can reach way down into a flower and drink. But a predatory insect can't do that. It has to have a mouth that can grab and paralyze a larva to take home for its babies. So that's a generalized mouth with like mandible parts on it. That can't get into a really skinny tubular flower. But it can get pollen and nectar from a flower like this that just sort of presents like that, and then the pollen and nectar are easy to get to. So let's look at some plants that are easy for them to eat from. Umbellifera. So these shapes of flowers are called umbels. It comes from the same word as umbrella, because look, it has a stem and then it opens out to this flat thing. These are lots of teeny, teeny, tiny flowers. So even those little teeny trichogramma wasps can get pollen and nectar from these. So here's a list. I have lots of lists of plants, or rather lists of lots of plants on the resource page, but a lot of them you can see are herbs, and even Queen Anne's lace that grows as a weed around here. Chervil is pretty early. The chervil in my garden, it's a anise flavored herb that grows really easily. It'll reseed for you, and it's already flowering, which is pretty good because dill and fennel and things, and even parsley, take quite a bit longer, I think. So chervil is a good one for early in the year. Daisy family is very friendly because even though this looks like one flower, this is actually, what, 1,000 flowers in here. And even in here, these are all individual flowers making pollen and nectar. It's just that none of these gets to make a petal. You only get to make a petal if you live on the outside, if you're an outside edge flower. Don't get a sunflower that's called a florist's pollenless one. Florist ones don't make pollen, so it doesn't dump pollen on the tables at a wedding or something. And don't use teddy bear sunflowers because they're not making pollen and nectar. The Tithonia or calendula, these are two different things. Those are a little daisy-shaped flower. Here's chamomile. You can pick the flowers. That's what you make chamomile tea out of. If you're gonna pick the flowers and use it for tea, just an aside, this one's already producing quite a lot of open pollen right here. This one is the one you want for tea. This one's more bitter, FYI. And here are some more coreopsis, and little teeny tiny marigolds are helpful for pollen and nectar for these animals. And there are plenty of natives. There's a variety of yarrow that's native. You can get it from Northwest Meadowscapes, I believe. I think the link is on the page. And if it's not and you really want it, just email me. It is more attractive. The natives have been reported to be more attractive than the cultivated kinds of yarrow. I do not have any experience with woolly sunflower, but it is a composite, so it has that pollen presentation. This fringe cup grows around here. It's on the edge of a lot of our wet woods, and we don't even see it because it's not usually this bright. It's usually greener than this, but it blooms in like March and April, I would say. So that's a great early plant for our pollinators. And of course, Queen Anne's lace shows up in every vacant field around, but it provides that perfect little flower. Oregon grape comes in tall versions and short versions and all kinds. And it's a very early flowering plant. It was flowering last month. And here are a bunch of other ones. Herbs, I bet you've seen this. Have you seen? I'm going to ask you in a minute. I'm going to ask, just pick people randomly, or I hope you raise your hand to tell me where you see a lot of insects on your plants. What do they go crazy for in your garden or in another garden even? So these are all very attractive to those pollinators and the predators alike. I love alyssum because it self-sows, so you only have to plant it once. Just throw it all over your garden. But it's super easy to pull out if you don't want it. And even if you have a really big patch, it's probably just one plant. So you just reach for it and yank it out if you don't want it. But I leave it because it makes great cover for all those beetles. I want cover that grows itself. So I even put in my beds where I have a vegetable bed and a little path and a veg bed and a little path. I have areas where I don't really have to walk in there much in between in those paths. Like I may have to weed twice and pick once, pull the onions out of the ground once. So I don't even, I'm not going back and forth. So I let it grow in those pathways. So sometimes I have a big portion of my garden that goes veg, flowers, veg, flowers, veg, flowers. And it really doesn't look like it has paths because it can tolerate, my stomping on it twice, 3 times in a season. But alyssum has those teeny flowers. And then when it dies in the winter, it dies back to this mat of straw, which is not very dense, but it's about that thick. And it suppresses weeds surprisingly well. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's pretty darn good. And what it doesn't suppress is its own babies. So eventually I decide to move it and it's already growing back. So I propose that you try some alyssum, but definitely herbs. And where are you going to put them? Well, you can put them together in a big patch like this, if off to the side of your vegetable garden. Having a big oasis, if you can, is great, but you also can put other smaller areas. So they go from the big oasis, the big attraction that they've noticed, over to the other stuff that they finally noticed. And they're going back and forth. And that encourages them to realize, oh, hey, there are great insects on this cabbage plant. So that can really help. This, is a perfect, huge example, and not everybody has space for this, right? This is another pretty darn big one where people have put this area in to a very large space. But this is the actual pea patch downtown behind the Congregational Church. And this is the whole pea patch. This is the shared gardening area. But right here, this is the street out front. And right along the fence is a super ornamental bed with lots of stuff that people have put in, but it's not growing food. And it does grow some plants that support the insects. And it can always grow more. I haven't really assessed whether it's, it has a lot of those plants, but probably we can put those things into our ornamental beds and into like the edges of our garden and all kinds of places. So you can watch your own plants and just see what insects seem to love them. So I would love to hear from somebody about what you notice is a very insect attracting plant. John McInnes, do you know any that are particularly insect attractive?
Sorry, I had to unmute there. Mostly my herbs, and then also garlic.
Oh, so you let your garlic, so many people pull their garlic scapes off, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you don't?
I always let some go.
Why do you do that? Specifically for them?
Just for them, just for the insects.
That's really great. That's very nice. Yeah, good point. And Heidi says wallflowers. That's really nice. So Heidi, you have wallflowers. Do you have wallflowers that grow just everywhere, or do you have them all in one area? Give Heidi a second. Maybe Heidi can't hear us right now. Oh, different areas, she says. Okay, yeah, and they kind of naturalize. Nice. Cool. John Fawcett, what do you notice? Do you have enough experience yet? Or you?
No, I dig holes and build things still. I'm not at
that's
that
right.
level of paying attention. I'm just the giant primate that my wife gets to sort of push around in the garden.
Yeah, and you're kind of in the hardscape right now, aren't you? Yeah. Well, it's really neat that you're supporting those other bees too and experimenting with that anyway. I think that's neat. Yeah. And Heidi also says, I think they like the oregano. I know, it's like bee crack. It is really beloved, I think. Yeah. Does anybody else have another suggestion for how to fit these things into the environments? How to fit these plants in? Cool, Heidi. Heidi says, I saw bees in the fringe cups. That's really neat. Heidi, did you see them on the side of the woods, like out in the wild, or do you have them in your garden? In your wild area, that's really great. Yeah. And it's easy here, well, relatively easy if you have a little space to have an area go wild because plants are so happy here. Okay, let me share this again just for a sec. And oh yeah, we're just gonna a couple more minutes. Some snakes can also eat slugs. And I don't think it's ever a mistake to have a garden that is friendly enough for snakes. So you can leave unmown snake highways. They don't like to go across your driveway or like a mown lawn because that's very vulnerable, right? They're like asking to be eaten. So they love to go through long grass. So whenever I have longer grass and I think, I really ought to take care of that corner with the long grass, sure enough, I get more snakes in my garden. So I'm trying to promote that. Pesticides and synthetic fertilizers, including on your lawns, can be caustic for them and dangerous. And Oregon State University says, sadly, if we have dogs and cats running around, it's probably not going to attract a lot of snakes. They're pretty avoidant of that. And you can walk your lawn before you mow or before you string trim, because I do see snakes every once in a while in somebody else's yard or something that have been horribly injured, but because the snakes apparently don't perceive the strimmer coming, they don't perceive the sound of it the way that we would. We would expect they would leave, but they don't always. And then hiding spaces, spaces between stones or boards with a little bit of space underneath in a place that gets warm is really great for them. And we have some books on the resource page that are about how to attract beneficial bugs and predatory insects. The one on the right is specifically predatory. And the one on the left is too. I have read these books, but I had forgotten. Next month, we're going to talk about diseases and pests. So what the heck is going on? Why does your basil just sort of tank and not really grow after a while? Well, it's because there's a disease that's relatively new in the United States that's hitting basil plants. And is that a disease? What's going on? So we have a lot of diseases and pests, recognize them, fight against them, get around them, live with them. And we'll be talking about that in June. So I think that is it, but I have to make sure that we've seen all of the chat. Oh, nice. So wait a minute. I subbies in the fringe cup. I took out the nipplewort and moved all of the fringe cup in. That is so great. That's very nice. Well, cool. That's very cool, Heidi. You're welcome, Emily. Whoops. I think that's it, John, at exactly 1 hour.
Awesome. Okay, so we taking off at this point.
Yes, thank you all for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for a great session.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm glad you're here. See you next week. It's the first Tuesday next month. I mean, not next week. This was the second Tuesday, but it's almost always the first Tuesday and next time we're doing things that can kill your plants.
I'll try to get it posted by tomorrow and send you the link, Carol.
Oh, that's fantastic. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Great information.
Oh, if you have not gotten on the reminder list yet, you're welcome, Dave. Thank you. If you haven't been on the reminders list that sometimes tells of a plant sale or some other opportunity, or just gives you a reminder that this class is coming up, you can email me at carol@hawkapp.com. It's on the resource page and you should already have the link for that. Oh, thanks, John. Yeah. Okay. Piece of
All
cake.
right.
Thanks for making that easy, John. Is there anything else I should know?
No. Nope. My
Okay.
brain's full of all kind of gardening stuff. I've been taking notes like crazy. I'm really excited to apply it now.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks a lot.
You bet. Happy Tuesday. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
See everyone later.